Welcome to the Financial Modeling Podcast.
So I would say it's pretty vital from a banking point of view that the financial model is robust and plays an important role.
Where we discuss the latest trends in financial modeling.
The financial model is essentially the nexus of renewable energy projects.
From AI and machine learning to automation and model auditing.
What this is all about is really opening up a conversation around innovation in financial modeling.
This is your number one source for financial modeling news, tips, and tricks with your host, Matthew Bernath.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another financial modeling podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Bernath. And to end off season 2, got a very, very special podcast today. People are calling it, within the group are calling it various things, but Lance, who's joining us as well this morning, is calling it the intergenerational podcast. And we're going to be chatting about Excel and where people use Excel and how the various guests have seen Excel used and what's the future of financial modeling as well. Is it something else besides for Excel? And if it is, what is that other tool? So with me this morning, I've got some very special guests sitting next to me in South Africa. I've got Colin. Colin Human's been on the podcast before in season 1, so many of you will recognize his voice, and many of you will know him from attending some of his training courses. I mean, Colin, how many people do you think you've trained on financial modeling in Excel?
It's a good question, Matt. On our website, it says 3,000, but actually I stopped counting at 3,000. So over 20 years, a lot.
In Australia, joining us, we've got Rubin. Lance also been a guest on the podcast. He was, in fact, the very first guest and still the most listened to podcast of all time, which is what is the future of financial modeling? So clearly what people are interested in. And Lance, great to have you with us this morning.
Thanks, you, Matthew. And thanks for allowing us to hijack your podcast with some great guests. Absolutely.
Joining us from America, somebody I'm very excited to have on the podcast because I haven't had him on the podcast before. Besides for the fact that I've been following him avidly and I'm a huge fan of him, and many of you will recognize his name. So Oz, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for being inviting me here. I'm excited. It's late at night, so I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'm glad to meet you all.
Oz, whereabouts are you in America?
I am in Portland, Oregon, which is a 3-hour drive south of Seattle.
So we're kind of spanning the globe here. And then last but not least, we've got Brian Donnelly joining us from London. How's it, Brian?
How are you doing? Everything okay here? Fabulous weather. We're all sunbathing, of course.
Just don't discuss the cricket.
No. Well, don't ask a Scotsman about cricket anyway, really. No, things are fine here.
So Brian, just a bit of a background, if you wouldn't mind, just introducing yourself. Obviously, you're a legend in the financial modeling, Excel, and technology innovation field. What are you up to at the moment?
Well, I don't know about a legend, but we are actively building my company, Synapse, and we seem by accident or design to spend our life trotting around the world, finding people with huge Excel implementations, doing all sorts of things. And at a very high level, we end up trying to help people automate those processes and keep the data in good shape. And it's quite a lot of fun. You meet a lot of people doing a lot of very, very wacky different things, but it all comes down to a fundamental digital plumbing problem. So we're doing that. There's about 40 of us. We're having great fun, and good to join you this morning. It's great stuff. Keen to hear all your war stories.
Thanks, Brian. So I think we've got some really fascinating people around the table. Okay, so kicking us off with the first question, and it's one that I get asked very often. We're moving into a world of big data. We're moving into a world of automated processes, and we're moving into a world where people are more aware of the risk and the risk that Excel spreadsheets can bring if they're not managed properly. So the first question to kick us off with is Excel dead? Lance, I'm going to let you kick us off because I know you actually wrote an article quite recently about this very topic.
Yes, thanks, Matthew. Actually today I've seemed to have dominated Google. So if you Google Excel is dead, you type in Excel is dead, my name comes up first on a Medium post that I wrote, and I went into battle with a gentleman by the name of Christopher Argent, and a LinkedIn post has got over 9,000 views. That's unheard of, really what spurred me on was I had a conversation with someone in a very large organization around the finance team, and she said she doesn't want to teach them how to use Excel better. She doesn't believe Excel is going to be around. She doesn't want to invest anymore in that technology. In fact, she doesn't even want finance people. She wants people to learn coding in Python because they're going to be the future and not do anything in Excel. Ooh. So that sort of took me aback because, I was a consultant trying to win some work, and I got slapped in the face and kicked out the door, basically. And I thought, well, hang on, is that where the world's come to? So I think, I definitely, and I listened to the podcast that, just recently, Matthew, that you had around Python and the benefits of it. And yeah, absolutely. There's things, and like I'll say before, there are things and there are things. There are things that'll do things better than Excel, 100%. Oz, I'm going to quote you on this one because you and I discussed this. Excel is the second best software in the planet. It can do everything, right? It may not be a CRM, but it can do a whole lot of other stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean it must. So I think the key thing is there's certain things that I just don't think that Excel will ever be replaced, and that's deal modeling, project finance modeling, anything that requires a bespoke solution that doesn't require coding. So anything that you have that context where you need to change stuff without hiring someone who's expensive and who can write complex code like what Brian and others can do. But ultimately, it's going to be around. It's still ubiquitous in its ease of use. But, ultimately, I just don't, yes, there's going to be things that we're going to stop doing in Excel, but there's still going to be a hell of a lot new stuff that we're going to do in Excel. And Excel's getting more powerful as well. So it's going to be doing stuff that we've never done before.
Oz, you mentioned, you were obviously mentioned in that. What are your thoughts around this?
I like a lot of what Lance is saying, especially that word bespoke. That is a sexy word, bespoke, because you hear that around men's suits. You go get a bespoke suit. That means somebody started with raw fabric and made you the perfect suit. And that's how I like to think about Excel. It's a development platform. It's not just cells and formulas and numbers where you just plug stuff in. It is a development platform like coding, like using Python and R, without having to go to the level of braces and indents and curly brackets and numbers and stuff. So, and that's a whole different mindset to want to deal with true coding. Only is shit. Ooh, I almost said a bad word. I remember one day I was dealing with VBA code. An hour I spent trying to find out why my code suddenly stopped working, and it was because I missed a double quote. I don't like being in that mindset. I like being able to see a formula come up and it gives me hints and I can get going. I can keep my momentum going. So Excel is good for the people who need bespoke solutions, but need that little helping hand. And you don't have to be reliant on going to the company DBA who knows how to write SQL queries and waiting 3 days for that person's solution. No. I can sit at my desk and use Excel, go rogue, get what I need to do without having to rely on somebody else.
Oz, you mentioned bespoke suits there. You're wearing rather a bespoke top that says Excel on it. Where do people listening to the podcast aren't able to see that, but we definitely need to post a picture of this.
Right. And I keep getting asked about it. Where can I get one? I had it made. And for the Excel Summit, right? Because I'm an MVP, and they usually give us swag, but it's generic MVP swag, an MVP jacket. I wanted something Excel. So I found a place online where I could go and design a jersey, put my name and put numbers on it, everything, put my Excel on Fire logo on it. And it cost $100. But hey, it's good quality.
$100 very well spent. Brian, over to you. I mean, you've written about this. One of your latest articles on LinkedIn is about GDPR and are spreadsheets making you an easy target? What are your thoughts around spreadsheets? I mean, is there still a place for them, or do they just introduce unnecessary risk into organizations?
Oh, no, of course there is. Without being overly philosophical, if we take 10 steps back, even though I'm a computer science graduate and background and have been programming for years, actually, I don't like programmers. I dislike the whole paradigm of business people having to be the slaves to some technical person who comes along who'll never understand financial modeling, who'll never understand accounting, who'll never understand genetics, which is where Excel's used a heck of a lot, by the way. And then you have to try and explain things to some technical person. You wait, as Oz said, days, weeks, months, and you don't get what you want. So from VisiCalc through MultiPlan, through SuperCalc, through whatever, you're basically democratizing things and putting a numerical, very powerful numerical tool in the hands of brainy accountants and other people so they can do what they want. It just seems so obvious. It seems so obvious that if William Shakespeare was alive today, he'd be using Word. He'd be using a word processor. So if Newton was around, he'd be using Excel. It's kind of obvious. Why wouldn't you have a very powerful numerical processing device that ordinary sensible people can use without being C programmers? It's just obvious. And all the other questions about it are superfluous. Of course, there are downsides and risks. Got that. I mean, the sun's a big yellow ball up in the sky. Some say it's 2 miles away. Get the obvious. Got that. So you get the power, and then you need to think of ways of assuaging the difficulty and solving the problems of data integrity. But you must have a numerical platform. Of course you must. It's just obvious. And anyone that thinks differently just doesn't understand how people deal with numbers, scientists, accountants, mathematicians. It's obvious.
Beautiful, man. And you got me reminded of how Excel users typically straddle the line between the business and IT.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
We understand all the weird scenarios, the business rules, where things fall apart. And then having to explain that to IT, and IT will get it mostly right. But then there are some significant scenarios that still don't work and say, I got to go back to the green light committee and get a budget and all this. I'm going to Excel. I thank you, but I'm going to Excel.
Of course. You're completely right.
Colin, you're giving training all the time in Excel. You must get asked this question all the time. Is this still a skill that I should be learning?
That's absolutely true, Matt. And, when I read the question, is Excel going to die? My comment was not in my lifetime. And then I thought, well, that's a bit dangerous because I've already sort of been around a long time. But seriously, in all our financial modeling courses, I try to put Excel in context. And I say to the trainees, understand that Excel is our toolkit. If we were plumbers, we'd have a toolbox and it would be full of plumbing tools. And if we were carpenters, we'd have a different toolbox. But we're financial modelers. And as financial modelers, in order to build those bespoke, flexible models, which are so often required in diverse situations, there is only one tool in my mind at this point of time which does it all, and that's Excel.
Well said, Colin, and I couldn't agree with you more. You can't get away from using Excel when it comes. It's just the best tool that there is when it comes to certain applications. Obviously, coming from a financial modeling background, the financial models I've built, you can build them in R, you can build them in Python. They won't be as visible. They won't be as easy to understand. And people just don't necessarily have that level of knowledge, and they won't be just that visibility and how it can represent cash flows, and how it can really visualize a financial model, even if it is visualizing it in numbers. That said,
can I add something? Because you're saying some really great things here, especially when you start talking about the future. And how many of us inherit spreadsheets and we can go in there and look and see what happens? But then what happens when you got a model that's built in R? Now you need somebody who understands that stuff in order to modify it, to understand it, to understand, is it working really? But you can pass along an Excel model and you can go onto a forum. You might have an uncle who knows Excel in the middle of the night, something more than having to go into this very specialized world of true hardcore programming.
Just if I can just chip in quickly, Oz, in response to your remarks. I've been running financial modeling training courses for 20 years internationally, all over the world. And the reality of life is simply this. Excel is ubiquitous. It is everywhere, in every organization, big, small, whether it's north, south, east, or west. So in my view, it'll be an awful long time before any kind of challenger really comes up and dislodges it.
Yeah.
That said, so I think we can all agree that Excel's here to stay, and it's certainly the best tool to use for many different situations. But that said, sometimes it's not, or sometimes people don't necessarily implement something properly in Excel. And I'm sure we've all seen Excel horror stories, and we've obviously read about them in the news. So maybe if we can just go around the table, I'd be very interested to find out from everybody, especially around the world, what is the best thing, what's the worst thing that you've seen being implemented in Excel? Colin, maybe we'll kick off with you.
Yes, unquestionably, Matt, the worst thing I've ever seen dates back a number of years, where there was a large financial model being built to fund a big infrastructure project being built by one of the banks here in South Africa. And who we, by the way, had taught financial modeling over time. Anyhow, in their wisdom, they allocated this task to a gentleman. And after building for 6 months, this particular gentleman decided that he wanted to go overseas. And so the model was passed on to one of his colleagues, who was horrified to find that it was riddled, and I mean riddled, with hard coding. And in desperation, the CEO of that particular bank called us up and said, we desperately need your help because we're approaching a deadline. And my dear friend and colleague, Dave Theron, spent 72 hours, if you can believe it, from the 18th of December to the 22nd of December in unpicking this disastrous model. So that's about the worst thing that I've ever seen in financial modeling. And sadly, as we all know, there's no easy to find situation or functionality in Excel to find hard-coded formulas. So I always say there's not many cardinal rules in Excel, but one of them is thou shalt not hard code. So that's about the worst. Best thing I've ever seen is when we used Excel to raise over 2 billion rand for a mining project. And this model which we built, I must admit it took a long time. It was a very complex thing. Was taken to London, where Brian is ensconced, and the money was raised on the AIM market, and the model was used quite extensively to answer questions and concerns about risk and so on. So those are my two stories.
And I hope that infrastructure finance modeler that built the model wasn't me, Colin.
No, Matt, it was very close to you because it was in the same banking environment from which you come.
And I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, also because infrastructure finance models, and I've recently done a podcast on this, because they are so complex and it can be so complicated. I mean, the room for error is just vast. It's actually quite scary. Oz, what's the best and the worst thing that you've ever seen? I mean, you've written a book on data analysis and being a data gorilla. I mean, you must have seen some amazing data analysis being performed in Excel.
A lot of things. Well, one guy talking about using Excel to detect fraud. Right. Because people would submit expenses and submit invoices and everything, and the existing systems were in place to process these things. But there was nothing that would suggest would identify what if somebody submits an invoice 3 times, expecting to get paid 3 times. There was nothing. So he built himself something in Excel to stick on to the existing systems to identify potential fraud. That was sexy. The worst, this monstrosity of a workbook that had been built over years, and it had all these tentacles to it, and it had over 70,000 VLOOKUPs in it.
Wow.
Yeah. Sometimes the thing wouldn't open. Sometimes it would open and
I thought you loved VLOOKUP, Oz.
Now, see, this is where I say, 70,000 of them was obscene. Yeah, that was an argument for index match or something else. And this was pre-Power Query. And me and the other developer who were working on this project, we kept saying, Excel can't do this. And the client would always say, well, can't you just write some VBA? But it had all these other things. It was supposed to import this and move that out of the way and bring this over here, and all of this stuff moving around in this monstrous workbook with 70,000 VLOOKUPs in it. And VBA was supposed to be this magic wand. And finally, the other developer fired them because they just weren't listening to us.
Crazy. Brian, you must have seen some crazy things dealing with spreadsheets and trying to manage the risk around them.
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest one of all time, which was about 4 years ago, I won't name it, but the second biggest bank in Britain, 136,000 staff. They got fined 28 million by the government regulator, the FCA, for mis-selling insurance and so on and so forth. And I was dragged up to Yorkshire, where 250 human beings, retired bank managers, were all sharing, I use the word sharing, one single spreadsheet on a shared drive in a huge kind of warehouse. And they weren't completely mad, but the reason they were doing that is the workflow to solve the insurance problem meant phoning up 2 million people in Britain to apologize for mis-selling them stuff. And at every stage in the phone call, the financial people had to note down, yes, I spoke to them, yes, I ID'd them, yes, I verified them, then I told them this, then it said, you get it. But 250 people were trying to share one spreadsheet to solve a very large problem that was, going to cripple this bank. And we got dragged in to have a look at it. And, anyone can state the obvious, you shouldn't be doing this, but they had to, because of what we said a while ago, which is the logic, the rationale of solving this financial problem could only be done by the people that really understood it, the financial people, and the regulator wanted things changed almost on a daily basis, the different calculations and audits. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And one way or another, we got it fixed. But that was pretty tricky. The best one was the American Environmental Protection Agency, where they publish every year a big file system of 1,500 spreadsheets that record vast amounts of data on public health, about the environment, about oil spills, and so on and so forth, and trying to write queries across that so you could correlate bad health and asthma with local industrial pollution. So that worked well. But we've all seen a ton of these problems everywhere.
Yeah,
absolutely. Lance, are the Excel issues more relevant in Australia or less so?
No, please. Australia doesn't have Excel issues at all. We don't do errors. We play cricket fairly, right? We don't have any of that. So I think there's a statistic out there, and there's two parts to the statistic, and I guess I use it a lot because it's real. 90% of spreadsheets have errors, right? If not built properly. But what's more shocking is 90% of the people who use those spreadsheets think they're error free, right? So there's perception and reality is vast. There's a vast gap between the two, and that's persistent everywhere. And I wrote a blog recently on the mindset of a spreadsheeter versus a mindset of a financial modeler. A spreadsheeter denies errors. A financial modeler recognizes all spreadsheets have errors and will go and hunt them down and do error trapping and error detection and get someone else to audit the model. As you say, Matt, the project finance models need to be audited because they're so high risk of errors. So I had a situation once in a major, I won't say who it was, a major corporation in Australia, where I was trying to tackle this beast called Excel spreadsheets and errors, more so to drive standardization and also make people realize that there's actually a life after spreadsheets. What I mean by that is if you actually build it properly and roll it, you actually save time. And you can do more analysis rather than more production, rather than copying and pasting. So I wanted to take people on this journey. So someone in the team said to me, "I'm over exaggerating the problem, just so that I can get some leadership support." And he fundamentally disagrees with my synopsis of the spreadsheet problem. So I turned around, I said, well, look, and I gave him the statistic, 90 and 90. And he said, oh, well, our spreadsheets don't have errors. I said, well, how do you know that? And he says, well, no one's ever asked us to change our forecast. So I said, but it's a forecast. It's never going to be right. And the fact that someone doesn't ask you to change it doesn't mean that it's not right. So I said, but you know what? If you're not in the 90%, I'm so happy to meet you. It's incredible. But let me just run some tools because I have some add-ins that do error checks. Let me run some tools and I'll send it back to you. And to my horror, there was 3 workbooks and there was 1,200 Excel errors, right? And then these are just Excel errors, which means div 0 or ref hash or whatever you want. And it takes one, right? It takes just one error to make a big mistake. And he had 1,200. And so, of course, I sent an email and said, hey, did you know your workbook's got this? And of course, I got no response. So, I think these sorts of things in the spreadsheet error conundrum is when people say get rid of the spreadsheet, I say, well, it's not the spreadsheet, it's how we use it. So that's on the bad side. On the good side, we built in Model Citizen a financial model to tackle a social issue called youth recidivism. Recidivism is where you offend and you go back into prison. And it's a social issue that is putting a huge amount of pressure on the government. We actually worked with the Queensland government on this. And so we were modeling a social benefit bond, which is a financial instrument which made payments to investors based on the outcome of this program. And so there was effectively services that were done, an intervention program with social workers and accommodation and all sorts of costs involved in the program. And a portion of those costs were funded by government, but also a portion of those costs were funded by the private sector. No different to a PPP, where you got public-private partnership, and yet the instrument that was used was a bond. Now, the trickiness about this model was the fact that the interest payments on the bond and the capital repayments in the bond were linked to the performance of the cohort group. So you had cohorts of going through this program, and we had to measure certain criteria, whether it's attendance to emergency wards or drug rehabilitation or any sorts of other social metrics which had to be in this model. So I'm glad to say that the project, from what I believe, has become very successful on the back of some of the work that we've done. I mean, I wrote a post of saying financial models can save people's lives. I never thought I would say that, but we can do amazing things with it if we recognize that they can have errors and do something about it.
So we don't think that financial models are everything, but we do think that they can save people's lives.
Believe more than think. We believe. We know. Yes.
So obviously I've seen some crazy and really bad spreadsheets. I mean, just on your example, Lance, people don't believe their spreadsheets have errors. I recently did the same thing. I've obviously got similar tools to you to do error checks on spreadsheets, and I recently did one on a spreadsheet for a friend of mine, and I said to them, look, there are actually some errors in your spreadsheet, and these are where they are. And they were shocked. They weren't offended that I found errors. They were genuinely shocked that there were errors in their spreadsheet. They just couldn't believe it. And I think it's that. I think everybody builds a spreadsheet and they just think that it's correct, and they don't even think that actually there could be errors. And as you say, I think financial modelers just accept that every spreadsheet has errors, and every forecast is not going to be correct. I mean, if your forecast is correct, it means you can forecast the future. I've said this before. If your forecast is correct, if your financial model is 100% correct and your forecast is correct, then you shouldn't be building financial models. You should be playing the lottery, because it means you can actually predict the future. So the next question I've got for everybody, and I'd be very interested to hear this, is sure, you've seen some terrible things and you've seen some great things. I want to know what's some of the craziest stuff that you've seen done in Excel. And I'll kick off by saying, some of the craziest things I've seen done in Excel are actually not financial modeling related at all, because people have built financial models, they've built infrastructure finance models in Excel. It's been done, people know it can be done, and people have done it. Some of the craziest things I've seen done are more the data science examples, things like k-means clustering and data science prototypes. And that's really obviously a big area of interest of mine, that data analysis piece, and the power of Excel to do data analysis and to query data and to even build prototype algorithms, I think is just incredible, and actually a completely underutilized part of Excel. Colin, what would you say some of the craziest things you've seen? I mean, you must have seen some crazy things. You've also, you built models for banks. You've audited them. I mean, you must have seen some crazy things.
Now, I want to know how are you defining crazy? Crazy like wow, or crazy like oh my God?
I'm not sure I understand the difference between those two, but I think look, crazy in a good way, because I think crazy in a bad way we've just discussed, some of the terrible things that we've seen, but just crazy completely out there that you wouldn't think could be done in an Excel spreadsheet. Let me put it to you like that. Something that you see and you're like, wow, even you think to yourself, why did you use an Excel to do that?
Just answering Matt, probably one of the most unusual things I've ever seen is when someone used Excel to create a picture, a tapestry. There were 237 columns and 280 lines. And these cells, of course, had various colors in it, and then a tiny little macro which shrunk all the column widths and so on and produced the most beautiful picture of a tapestry. So what motivated that, I have no idea, but highly unusual.
Putting the art into Excel.
Exactly.
Brian, what's some of the craziest things? And I don't even want to hear some of your horror stories, dealing especially with Synapse and dealing with some of the risk that you're trying to mitigate there. But let's keep it on crazy in a good way.
Well, we had a great conversation from a veterinary surgeon in Johannesburg who rang up last year. And he was doing the most amazing things. So he goes round, he's got about 60 giant farms, dairy farms with lots and lots of cows throughout Africa. And these cows, deliver milk and they have to eat. And there's a whole series of programs that gather data about how much food they're getting, how much weight they put on, how much milk they produce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And guess what? Everything is dumped out into giant Excel spreadsheets, which he somehow has on Dropbox somewhere. This is monitoring millions of dollars worth of revenue. And the spreadsheets all go up on Dropbox. And he found someone in Romania to write some strange code that would effectively do database queries across all the daisy cows in Africa, how much milk they're producing, the correlation with the input food they're getting, the revenue, everything running on giant spreadsheets in Dropbox with some programming language no one had ever heard of. And then the Romanian disappeared. So he rang us up in a panic. And yes, that's a fairly strange one.
So Excel not only saving. So Excel's not only saving human lives, it's saving animal lives as well.
Yes, and milk. Many gallons of milk. Yes.
Lance, what's the craziest thing you've seen Excel being used for?
Well, Colin sort of stole my thunder on that one, because someone actually drew the Melbourne skyline on Excel, on an Excel spreadsheet, and then printed it out. So again, I'd say the art is where, I mean, why they did it is beyond me, but you can Google it. I think there was a Japanese person as well that did some tapestry. I think that's the one that you're referring to, Colin. But someone did it more recently. I think a year ago, they actually did the entire Melbourne skyline in Excel and then printed it in, for their office. So again, I think, we tend to stay within our boxes. Excel is just numbers, and we don't really think about, everything else that we spoke about is generally numbers. But I get amazed where people do stuff like, draw pictures. I simulated for Model Off. There's one of the questions where you have to simulate a game of snakes and ladders using Excel, and so I built a solution using a data table where you simulate game throws and who's going to win which person, if they go first or second, depending on how many different dice they roll or where they sit on the board, and so again, game simulation you can run on Excel. But yeah, I was originally going to say the Colin, so I had to quickly think on my feet and find another one. But
so I like what you're saying. We do think in our boxes, and that's why I actually enjoyed. I used to give financial modeling training. Everybody's there, they're building financial models, and that's what they're doing in Excel. But I also used to give VBA training, and I loved the VBA training because the examples there were just things I'd never seen in my life before. People were doing the most insane things. And obviously, people would come with the VBA training. People were engineers and doctors and all sorts of backgrounds. And they were just, I've had advertising people use VBA to allocate advertising spend and budgets. And I really enjoyed those courses just to see the diversity of what Excel is being used for. You obviously, you love the data stuff as well, like me. By the way, that book that you've written, it deserves every single star. It's got on Amazon at the moment. So talk to us a bit about some of the crazy things you've seen. Are they more in the financial space or are they more in the data space?
Data. Because I don't really do financial stuff. It's usually data. So I don't remember where this came from, but there is a spreadsheet with the music modes in it. So there's a tab for string, a tab for keyboard. So I go to the string tab, and because I play bass, I put in that I play a 4-string bass, and I tune my bass DGCF. And I want to know G flat harmonic minor, the maybe Dorian mode, and it shows where all of the notes are on the 4-string bass fretboard.
In Excel.
In Excel. Yes.
You have to upload a YouTube video of that.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah. I can show it to folks. And then more simple is, before I found this sheet, this workbook, I started putting song arrangements in Excel because sheet music is written for economy of paper. So you can have like 4 sheets of paper with short measures and long measures, and it's hard to see any type of patterns in a song. So when I realized, wait a minute, I'm going to simplify this. I'm going to not put all the notes in. I'm just going to put the chords that need to be played. Then I could see patterns, and I said, oh, these 4 measures that start the song, that's an intro that we never go back to. It's these next 8 bars that when we go back to this 8. We don't go back to the other one that would be 12. All right, makes sense. Oh, and there's this weird chord that happens. Now I see where this weird chord happens. It happens in the last measure of this one weird section. Okay, got it. Oh, and then there's this one measure thing that we keep forgetting. Okay, so we got the one measure. All right, this song makes sense. And now it's on a half sheet of paper and not 4 big papers and people shuffling around.
I think Oz wins that one.
Hands down. Oz.
Yeah.
Hands down.
Absolutely.
So we've spoken about, the different uses of Excel and the things that we've seen. A lot of us, we're fortunate enough, we're Excel experts, so we do find it a little bit easier to work with in Excel. But many people out there don't utilize Excel properly. People don't know about Excel add-ins. I always say to people, you buy a cell phone from the store, you go and download all your apps from the Play Store, but you buy Excel, you never use any add-ins. But Excel has a lot of native functionality as well. That's just amazing. Obviously, we're talking about things like Power Query and just some of the stuff in Excel that people aren't aware of. It's maybe kicking off with you, Brian. What's the one piece of Excel that you think more people need to know about that people are underutilizing?
No, you've got me there. I will answer the question, but I'll preface it by saying in all the big, boring companies around the world we work with, there's normally a taboo on add-ins. So lockdown big corporates that we deal with say there will be no add-ins in our corporate environment. You just can't have them, period. It's not happening. So no binary add-ins. And so people have to deal with native Excel, which is fine. But the vague answer, and I'm sorry it sounds vague, is for me, the one thing, the most important thing we need to do, you talk about apps, is to be able to connect Excel one way or another with a proper grown-up database so we can render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. In other words, Excel does marvelous things with manipulation of data, analysis, and so on. We all get that. But we also need to have gigabytes, terabytes of data in a proper grown-up database. We can access and push data into the database and suck it from the database whenever we need. So for me, that's the essential oxygen we need to breathe. The Excel for doing great stuff in the front end, but we've got to have a big, proper grown-up database in the back end. Otherwise, I just couldn't imagine how we could work.
Oz, leading on from that, because obviously that's a lot around data, what would you say is the most underutilized piece of Excel? Surely somebody in the group has to say Power Query.
I have to say tables. Tables. I go into places and nobody is using tables. Now, yes, they do need to know about Power Query, and this is something that I insist on when I go make new courses for LinkedIn. A lot of times I'm just like, let's keep this with beginners. And I feel like it would be irresponsible for me to pitch a course to beginners and not say anything about tables or Power Query. All right. So I'm not going to nest an if inside of a XOR, inside of a match, inside of a choose. No, I'm not going to do that. But damn it, they're going to get some tables and Power Query.
I've got to agree with you on tables there. I don't even think about tables. And one of the, when I was teaching dashboard courses, a lot of it was around tables and how tables will automatically obviously name the rows and columns. And I think there's a lot of power there that I actually agree with you. I think people aren't understanding the power of tables. Yep. Colin, what do you think? You obviously giving training all the time. What's one thing you tell people they need to look out for?
I think I've got a slightly different mindset to some of our fellow presenters here today. I'm much more interested in the outcome of a model than its construction. And I tend to focus a lot on that. And some years ago, we adopted the FAST standard from F1, F9 and Andrew Barkley and the chaps in London. And one of the key issues for me personally about financial models is easy to use, easy to understand, transparent. So those functions in Excel which make things easier to understand, like a simple thing like adding text to a value cell to amplify what the value is important to me. I'm not into large data sets like Oz and Brian never really get involved in them. Quite frankly, in all the models that are built, and I don't know how many there are, we've very, very seldom ever had to analyze or utilize large data sets, probably because most of the models have been project models, without, and the large data sets were absent. So really, as I say, I have the mindset of a businessman, and I'm more interested in the results of the model than its finite construction, always, of course, with the caveat that we want to avoid errors and those kinds of things.
I think you're 100% correct, Colin. In fact, one of the things I love about Excel, maybe coming back from my engineering days, is the fact that there's so many different ways to do something. If you don't necessarily know one functionality, you can achieve the same thing by using a different functionality. If you don't, I think you're quite right. I think, and often it's a case of don't unnecessarily overcomplicate a model. Keep it simple.
That's absolutely true. I mean, often in our training courses, delegates are required to write formulas, sometimes complex formulas. We try and avoid nested ifs, and particularly when they get over the top. But it's the flexibility of approaching the logic that people use can vary quite dramatically, but yet achieve exactly the same correct result. So that's one of the things that I really appreciate about Excel.
Yeah.
Brian, would you say that, when it comes to Excel, one of the things that people sometimes misunderstand is where Excel spreadsheets fit into the ecosystem of a company and managing how those spreadsheets actually interact with the rest of the ecosystem?
Yes, that's very elegantly put. I think my experience being a bit of an aging hippie is that in every decent-sized company around the world, there's guerrilla warfare where people just get absolutely fed up with the hegemony of IT and so on, and they say, we'll just do it in Excel. So what I see everywhere, every single company, is there are giant systems, SAP and ERP and big corporate systems, and then business people, accountants very often just go and extract the data, and they use Excel as a big shopping basket. They get tons of data out, and then they do all the processing in Excel. So in other words, they're circumventing the processing of all these different heterogeneous systems. They're just taking the data and doing it in Excel. So they're sidelining the corporate IT systems because they won't give them the result they want. That's one of the major reasons they use spreadsheets, to get the answers they want, because they can't get it from corporate IT or corporate business processing, and good luck to them, I say.
Amen.
So Matt, you clearly don't want to hear my tip, right?
I absolutely do. I was a bit distracted by how much Oz was agreeing with Brian over there.
Because my Excel skill came exactly because of what he was describing. I'm sitting there in a cubicle and I need stuff. My boss has a meeting in 4 hours, and I go to the DBA needing something, and the guy says I can have it in 3 days. No, that's not going to work. But I can get a data dump, and I can manually drag cells and filter and sort my way to glory to get my boss what he needed in 4 hours.
Exactly. You put your finger on it. And that's the thing no one ever mentions about Excel. It's the data container de facto in every company in the world. You've got all these impenetrable big systems, and you can't write APIs into them, be serious, grow up. But what everyone can do is get, if you'll forgive me, a dump from Excel, and they do that, and they get all these multiple dumps, and then they join them all up with multiple linked workbooks, which leads to challenges. But no, that's what they do. It's a large shopping container as well as a calculation engine.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. A big buzzword these days is citizen data scientist and citizen data analyst. And really, what's powering that is Excel, because that's the tool that people are comfortable with, that they can become citizen data scientists and data analysts in, because they can extract the data, as you say, from some sort of ERP system or wherever the case might be, and perform the analysis themselves in Excel. Lance, what's your most...
I'm thinking when you say citizen, I'm thinking somebody with a walking stick and a monocle. Yeah, that's Excel. Our walking stick and our monocle. Yeah.
Sherlock. Yeah.
Lance, what's your most underutilized thing in Excel?
So I'm going to be different again, because I think quite often we get so stuck inside Excel. So I want to say the format in which you save Excel is heavily underutilized. People don't actually realize the amount of efficiency that you gain from saving in different formats. XLSB, and there's so many people that actually don't know. In fact, I went to a government department and they had a 70 meg XLSM workbook because it had a macro in it. And it was running, and it would lock up the machine. Now, that probably, as in your case, did have lots of VLOOKUPs, but irrespective, it was locking up, and they could not do anything else. They had to go for a coffee every single day. This was happening. And I said to him, why don't you save it as XLSB? He's like, what's that? I said, well, it's binary. It's Excel's own binary format. He says, I've never heard of that before. So anyway, it was a 2-day course. He came back the next day and said, you've changed my life. He said, like, I saved it. Now, not only does it run, but I can do other stuff with it. And the file size went from 70 down to 30 meg. So XLSB is heavily, heavily underutilized. And really, if you think, and I don't even know if many people, I'd love to know if people around this table know the story around XLS versus XLSX. Oz probably knows it because he's got the Microsoft inside word around the evolution of the file format of Excel. Colin, are you familiar with that story? Why Excel went from XLS to XLSX?
I'm not, Lance. I'm listening attentively to the discussion. When it did, I just moved with it, without really looking under the hood, so to speak.
Yeah, and so I think I'd be interested, Brian, are you familiar with the story, or?
Yes, we were just looking at it the other day by purest coincidence because we're creating a serialized stream of XML, which is really what Excel stored as. And we're trying to see if the current formats can be used programmatically. But anyway, I digress. Back to you guys.
Yeah, tell the story. Yep.
As you know the story, right?
Pieces of it.
So a good friend of mine, Mr. Joseph McDade, who now works for Microsoft, this was before he worked for Microsoft, told me the story. I didn't realize it at the time. And what he did, and you can do this at home, and no one's going to get injured. You can save your XLSX file, change it to .zip, and then open it in a browser, and you can actually see the code. You can actually see the native code of Excel, which obviously Brian would know about. And so why did Excel do that? Why did Excel make it open source, right? Apparently, the US government turned to Microsoft and said, you know what, your spreadsheet is used in running our defense departments. And if Microsoft had to get taken over by some Chinese, or Russian or something happen and take over Microsoft, we cannot open or get inside the spreadsheet. We can't actually see. So XLS is a lockdown. You can't actually open it up. XLSX, because it's built in XML and it's zipped, that's why XLS, crunched down 10 times. I mean, I remember working on workbooks that were 30 meg XLS went down to 3 XLSX. So it's a zipped format written in XML, more efficient. But that event, so they said, look, now we can open up Excel. We can actually look at it. We don't need to have the Excel program. We can open it up. And what walked in next to the door? Google Sheets, OpenOffice, and a proliferation of all these other spreadsheet technologies as a result. Because now people can say, that's what a spreadsheet looks like in code. So that resulted in this evolution. Now, getting back to the point, what is XLSB? XLSB is back to Microsoft's own proprietary format, which is more condensed, written in binary, which probably Brian would know more about than I would, but it's more efficient and you lose no functionality. So it's more efficient, smaller, and it improves the processing power. And so often people get these, monoliths of a spreadsheet which hang and say too many formats and it crashes. And one of the first things you do, you just save it as XLSB, and then at least you can get the stuff and then rebuild it. Because of course, if it starts happening like that, you should not be using that file again. So I think people, yes, it grows beyond it gets a life of its own. But when it gets too far, just save it as XLSB, and then at least it'll be more workable.
So some fascinating history of Excel there and the different file formats. It's also fascinating to.
Yeah, just want to add something when you mentioned that zip thing. I have used that because there was one spreadsheet that people were sharing, and they got to it one day and could not open it. Nobody could. And then they sent it to me. I did the whole save it as a zip, unzip it, looked in it. It showed me the last editor, and it was somebody who was using XLS. She was on Excel 2003. And she's either got to be upgraded or out. Yeah, because the underlying code is different, and we didn't know we were working with a time bomb between these different versions of Excel. So I think she did upgrade, and so everybody was on XLSX, and I was able to get the file I wasn't able to get it to open. I was able to get the data out of it and into an XLSX.
So that's why you called Rosie the devil, Brian's assistant, right?
That's why what?
That's why you called Rosie, Brian's assistant, the devil, because she attached an XLS file into LinkedIn when we were sharing it.
Oh, right. Yes. It triggered me. It was like, I'm back. That's it. Yeah.
Oh, you should get written into your shirt. It should say Excel, upgrade or you're out.
Yeah, that's right. So when I would work with clients and I find out somebody's on 2003, I feel like,
get with the program.
I don't like walking across minefields, y'all. No, I'm not doing this. So, all right.
Talking about upgrading, maybe to end off the podcast, I'm very interested to go around the table and really hear from everybody. So what's the future? You've spoken Excel's here to stay. It's clearly not going anywhere. But what's the future? Microsoft is doing a huge push for Excel Online. They haven't updated or upgraded, and they've said they're really not going to support VBA anymore, especially with Power Query coming in. So what's the future of Excel? Lance, maybe kicking off with you.
Look, I think we all agree that Excel is going to stay, but I think the world's going to evolve and things are going to happen. And if Microsoft are not going to make certain things happen or do certain things, the world's going to do it anyway. And so we come back to this whole thing of add-ins. Sharing workbooks is not easy. Creating formulas in a really scalable way is not easy. So we are heavy users of add-ins, and there's a couple that we use. Some of them with APIs that connect to accounting systems, which Power Query doesn't do because you need authentication. And maybe I just don't know, but you need REST API, and there's a whole bunch of other things, push and pull, not just pulling data, but pushing data. So I think there's a whole range of Excel add-ins that are going to accelerate even further. And VBA is one of the most underrated. And yes, Power Query does deal with a lot of stuff, but I think, the coding and the automation that sits around Excel is only going to increase. I think the future is about more usability, more scalability, and more customization. And I think the error rate's going to start coming down eventually because people are going to say, get with the program. You need to build models better. I think the future is going to be, use some technologies like Synapse where you can start connecting things together and connect a spreadsheet into an enterprise grade SQL at the back. I think there's a whole range of paradigm shifts in terms of we're not getting rid of it, but we're uplifting it and upgrading it.
Colin, what would you say the future of Excel holds?
I answer that, Matt, from a perspective of modeling, of course. And we all know that Michael Hutchins has been doing a lot of work in Medano and things like that. And I've been looking at a program just recently called Vision, which is really taking Excel and producing smaller bite-sized chunks which are pre-built and so on. And from a context, in the context of modeling, we all know, Lance was talking about the ignorance is bliss guy who didn't think that there were errors in his models and so on. And we all know that there's things like Spreadsheet Professional or Oak Review that we use to audit or check our models. But I do believe that there is scope for the development of pre-built sections, structures, if you want to call them that, for modeling, which can be plugged together. Typically, the ones that I've looked at in the past, the only restriction seems to be their somewhat lack of flexibility, but I'm sure that that's just a matter of time. So I do believe that whilst I believe that Excel, we have this whole concept of driverless cars at the moment, and maybe at some time in the future there will be driverless cars. But in my mind, Excel is here and it's going to stay for an awful long time. I see that Excel introduced, or Microsoft introduced, finally, after much pushing from our end of the wicket, a function called ifs to facilitate nested if statements. I remember for years and years trying to write nested if statements, and the syntax, whether you put the bracket or the comma in the wrong place or left out your double quote, like I was referred to earlier, would just frustrate you to death. So I do believe that they will make sort of minor changes, but I don't see anything really significant coming out of Microsoft.
Brian, from your side, what do you think the future is?
So the answer I'd give is more what I'd ideally like to see rather than what may happen, if that's okay. And my answer is that we all are fully aware of all the current, the great things about Excel, and we're aware of the bad news. So I'd like to see a resolution of the problems, the bad news, which could be characterized by yet another acronym, RASIM, the usual reliability, availability, security, scalability, integrity, manageability, horrible acronym. But really what all the customers we see want is a reliable, multi-user, auditable, proper grown-up system to complement the strengths of Excel. So that's my wish list, turn it into a enterprise-grade multi-user system that eliminates all the problems that all the boring financial journalists keep carping on about, all the problems. Well, fix the problems, and then you've got a brilliant solution.
So Microsoft, if you're listening, Brian has just given you a roadmap for the next few years on what to work on. Oz, what do you think the future is? Besides for everybody wearing Excel branded baseball tops.
I like how the Excel development team has watched how people really use Excel and have moved with us. Because for years I had been hearing, why isn't that in a database? Why are you doing it in a spreadsheet? Spreadsheets weren't made for that. And then here comes Power Query and those joins. And now we're getting this database-like stuff. And it's like, and they're paying attention and saying, like it or not, people use Excel like a database. And especially when you got one person or a small 5-person company, who's going to learn the database and maintain it? Nobody. But they still have data. And I'm so glad to see Redmond respond to that and bring people the functionality they need and not say, hey, you just need to go learn databases. No, I love it. Now, a concern I have is about so much of a rush to the web. I think about times where you go to some place and there's a bad internet connection, or one person, his client works in a mine, there's no internet connection in the mind. So I worry if there might be a push in the future to get off a desktop and have everything in the cloud. And if you work in the mine, to hell with you.
So certainly a common view is that, Microsoft, obviously they are building this Excel online, but just to continue maintaining Excel on desktops and continue supporting that, because at the end of the day, people also want that. And I think you've highlighted now, and people also need it. And they need that Excel on their laptop. So I think just to wrap up the podcast, I think we can all agree that Excel's here to stay, that there's a huge future in Excel, especially not only from a financial modeling perspective, but also from a data analysis perspective. As Excel, as you may say, Oz, it becomes, people are treating it more like a database. And as Brian said, extracting data from a database and using it to analyze their data, because it's just easier to do it in Excel than it is in the database. Whether it's Excel add-ins, like Lance says, and obviously continue to build financial models, because as Colin says, it's just the easiest tool in which to build them. And quite frankly, if you send a financial model to a bank in R or Python, they're not going to look at it. So it's still a tool. It's still a tool that's very much used and useful, and still something that's going to evolve and be with us for a long time to come. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today on the Financial Modeling Podcast. And I think the next time we do this, we must all do it in person.
Yes.
Great idea.
I support that. In Oregon.
Yes. Oh, in Oregon. So I don't get to see Johannesburg or London.
You don't want to see Johannesburg.
The next group chat to end off season 3 of the Financial Modeling Podcast will be with Oz hosting us in Oregon.
On Thursday, the 5th of March, 2020, the world's leading financial modeling professionals will attend the Financial Modeling Summit. With new developments from automation and AI to financial modeling certifications, the financial modeling profession is at the forefront of financing some of the largest deals globally. Stay tuned to financialmodelingsummit.com for registration to hear the latest financial modeling trends and what the future of financial modeling holds.